So this crazy HOA president called the cops on me for building a dock on my own lake. Not the community lake, not some shared property. My lake, the one my family's owned since 1962. It's 6:30 Tuesday morning. I'm sipping coffee, watching mist rise off the water. Peaceful as heaven. Then wham, sirens screaming up my driveway. My first thought, heart attack, car wreck. Something serious. Nope. Karen Kellerman, HOA queen and professional busybody, convinced the police I was destroying community waterways. About my private lake. I could still feel the vibration from her stomping across my wooden dock earlier, pointing fingers like some detective. Here's the kicker. By the time this was over, Karen and her precious HOA were writing me checks. Every month. Just for the privilege of using water that was never theirs. What would you do if some neighbor tried to control property you own free and clear? Before we jump in, tell me where you're watching from. And drop your HOA horror stories in the comments. You're gonna love how this ends. The name's Wade Garrison, 52, retired electrician. This whole mess started because I wanted to fish in peace. I inherited this slice of heaven from my grandfather back in 2009. 3-bedroom cottage on Lake Serenity's eastern shore. Nothing fancy. But 40 acres of crystal clear water and the best bass fishing in 3 counties. Every morning I'd step outside and breathe in that mix of pine needles and lake water. Better than any fancy air freshener. The loons would call across the water at dawn. Their voices echoed off the far shore like nature's own alarm clock. Grandpa bought this wilderness in 1962, built everything himself, cleared the shoreline, stocked the lake with bass and bluegill, even hand-carved the dock posts. Smart man who believed in doing things right the first time. In 2015, I scraped together enough to buy an extra 200 feet of shoreline from a neighbor heading to Florida. Figured it would give me more privacy after my divorce. Life was quiet, peaceful. Just me, the fish, and 40 acres of mirror-smooth water. Then 2018 happened. Some developers discovered our little paradise, built a bunch of McMansions on the western and northern shores. Big houses, bigger boats, biggest egos. Suddenly, Lake Serenity had rich neighbors who wanted to organize everything. They formed an HOA faster than you could say property values. Wanted order, wanted standards, wanted control over every blade of grass and every dock nail. Enter Karen Kellerman, 47 years old. Real estate agent with perfectly styled blonde hair and a white BMW she washes twice weekly. Moved here from some cookie-cutter subdivision. Wanted the charm of lakefront living with proper community oversight. Karen always carries this little leather folder containing the HOA rulebook. I swear she's memorized every comma and semicolon. She talks sweet but cuts deep, you know the type. Smiles while saying, "We maintain standards for everyone's benefit." Meanwhile, her eyes calculate your property value and find you lacking. I should mention Karen has some interesting opinions about who belongs in upscale communities. She's never said anything directly, but there have been comments. Little remarks about certain types and maintaining the right kind of neighborhood character. You get the picture. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in late spring. I'm down at my dock getting my little aluminum boat ready for some early bass fishing. The wood felt like rough sandpaper under my bare feet. 60 years of weather had worn those planks smooth in some spots, splintery in others. That's when I heard it. Click, click, click. High heels on wooden dock planks. "Excuse me," Karen called out in her fake sweet voice. "You need to remove that unauthorized watercraft immediately." I turned around, coffee mug still warm in my hands. Steam was rising off the surface, mixing with the morning mist. "I'm sorry, what now?" She opened her little leather folder like she was serving a court summons, started reading in this robot voice. According to HOA Regulations Section 4.7, all watercraft must be architecturally approved and meet established community aesthetic standards. She pointed at my grandfather's humble 1960s rowboat like it was roadkill. That is definitely not approved. The morning air carried that earthy scent of cattails and old cedar. Peaceful sounds of water lapping against the shore made this whole conversation feel completely insane. "Karen," I said, setting my coffee down carefully, "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not part of your HOA, never have been. This property's been in my family since before your organization was even a thought." Her smile got tighter. Everyone on this lake follows our rules, period. We're responsible for maintaining property values and community standards for all residents. Not on my property, you're not. That's when Karen's sweet mask slipped completely. Her voice dropped to Arctic temperatures. We'll see about that. She clicked away down my dock, leaving angry tire tracks in my gravel driveway. I thought that was the end of it, like watching someone argue with a stop sign. You want to help, but the sign's gonna win every time. I was about to learn just how wrong I could be. 2 weeks after Karen's little dock visit, I thought we'd reached an understanding. She'd stay on her side of the lake, I'd stay on mine, and we'd both get on with our lives. Then my driveway got blocked. It started innocently enough. Tuesday evening, I'm coming back from the grocery store with a truck full of supplies. As I turn into my driveway, there's a wall of cars. 4 vehicles parked right across the entrance like some kind of roadblock. I sat there for a minute, engine idling, wondering if someone was having a medical emergency. Then I noticed the little HOA signs in each windshield and heard voices drifting from Karen's backyard. Emergency board meeting, apparently. How convenient. I walked over to Karen's property, groceries still sitting in my truck. The smell of citronella candles mixed with evening humidity as I approached their little patio gathering. Karen sat at the head of a folding table like she was chairing the United Nations. "Excuse me," I called out. "Could someone move their car? You're blocking my driveway." Karen looked up from her notes with this innocent expression that would make a Sunday school teacher proud. "Oh, Wade, so sorry. We're discussing community safety protocols. This was the only time everyone could meet." Now, here's something I learned during my 30 years as an electrician. When someone says, "this was the only time," they usually mean, "this was the most inconvenient time for you." It's like how emergency meetings always happen right when you need to get somewhere important. "No problem," I said, forcing a smile. "Just need to get my groceries in before the ice cream melts." 20 minutes later, they were still discussing protocols. My ice cream was soup and my patience was running thin. But watching Karen orchestrate this little power play gave me an idea. If she wanted to play games, maybe it was time I learned the rules. That night, I started digging through the paperwork my grandfather had left me. Dusty boxes in the basement, filled with contracts and surveys and legal documents I'd never bothered to read. Boring stuff, mostly. Until I found something that made my heart skip a beat. Turns out my property lines don't stop at the water's edge. They extend 50 feet into the lake itself. My grandfather had been smarter than I realized when he bought this place. I remembered him mentioning something years ago about water rights, but I'd never understood what he meant. The more I researched, the more interesting it got. The HOA had never filed any official claims for their lake access. They were basically operating on good faith and assumptions. And according to their own precious bylaws, the ones Karen quoted like scripture, any new water regulations required unanimous consent from all lake property owners. Since nobody had ever asked me to consent to anything, technically their whole system was built on shaky legal ground. It was like discovering your neighbor had been using your electricity for 3 years without asking. I spent the next morning installing security cameras along my shoreline. Nothing fancy, just basic units pointing toward the water. If Karen wanted to document everything I did, fair was fair. The cameras paid for themselves on day 1. I caught 3 HOA members, including Karen, walking along my shoreline with measuring tapes and notebooks, taking pictures, making notes, acting like they owned the place. I could have called the cops right then. Trespassing is trespassing. But sometimes you let people dig their own holes a little deeper before you hand them the shovel. Instead, I put up private property signs every 20 feet along my shore, bright yellow, impossible to miss. The sound of my hammer echoing across the water felt oddly satisfying. Karen's response was swift and predictable. Another call to the county claiming I was creating unnecessary tension and disrupting community harmony. The county official, clearly tired of Karen's repeat performances, basically told her to work it out like an adult. You could hear his patience evaporating through the phone. That's when I knew Karen had run out of official channels. No more cops, no more inspectors. No more bureaucratic backup. She was going to have to get creative. And boy, did she ever. I started seeing her white BMW cruising past my property twice a day. She'd pull over, take photos from the road, always careful to stay legal. But the real tell was when I spotted her floating offshore in a kayak, pointing a professional camera at my dock like some kind of lake paparazzi. Something big was coming. I could feel it in the humid air, the way you sense a thunderstorm building on the horizon. Karen's big plan revealed itself the following weekend in the most obnoxious way possible. Saturday morning, 6:30 sharp. I'm out on my dock with my coffee, watching the mist rise off the water like I'd done 1,000 times before. Perfect fishing weather, the kind of morning that makes you grateful to be alive. Then I heard them coming. Boat engines. Multiple boat engines. Getting louder. Around the bend came what looked like a miniature naval fleet. 5 boats, all flying little HOA flags circling my shoreline in synchronized formation. Karen led the parade in a gleaming white speedboat that probably cost more than my annual pension. Water Safety Patrol, she announced through a battery-powered megaphone that could wake the dead, ensuring proper boating protocols and community standards. I nearly choked on my coffee. These people were actually patrolling my water, acting like they were the Coast Guard. Honestly, it looked like a confused Navy SEAL team practicing formations around a guy just trying to catch bass. The absurdity was so thick you could fish with it. Every 15 minutes, they'd circle back past my dock. Karen would slow down, point that megaphone in my direction, and announce something about monitoring compliance with established waterway standards. The other boats followed her like ducklings, their wakes rocking my grandfather's old dock with unnecessary force. But watching their little water circus gave me an idea. All that research I'd been doing wasn't just about property lines. I'd stumbled across something interesting about navigation laws while reading through my grandfather's old files late one evening. Turns out there's this thing called no-wake zones. Makes perfect sense when you think about it. Boats speeding past fishing areas create dangerous wakes that can damage docks or hurt people. Property owners can actually petition the state to establish safety zones around private structures. My grandfather had mentioned it once, saying he'd considered it but never got around to the paperwork. While Karen's patrol was busy circling like sharks smelling blood, I was quietly filling out DNR paperwork on my kitchen table. Request for a 100-foot no-wake zone around my dock. Completely legal, completely reasonable, and something that would turn Karen's dramatic boat parade into the world's most boring slow-motion crawl. The irony was delicious. Karen thought she was controlling my activities, but she was actually giving me perfect justification to control hers. Sometimes the best solutions hide in plain sight. That afternoon brought an unexpected phone call that changed everything. Mr. Garrison, this is Marlo Oakley, maritime lawyer here in town. I heard about your situation through the county clerk. You know how small towns are. Mind if I buy you coffee? When a lawyer offers to buy you coffee instead of billing you $300 an hour, you pay attention. We met at Murphy's Diner, where the apple pie is legendary and the gossip flows faster than the coffee refills. The red vinyl booths had seen decades of local drama, but nothing quite like this. Marlo had been watching Karen's HOA shenanigans for months. Apparently, they'd been testing boundaries with other property owners too. Pushing here, prodding there, seeing what they could get away with. But the bombshell she dropped made my head spin faster than Karen's boat parade. That HOA insurance doesn't cover lake activities, period. Every time they're out there playing water police, they're creating massive personal liability for every board member. One accident, one injury, one wake-related collision, and they're all personally on the hook for damages. The smell of cinnamon and apples from the fresh pie couldn't distract me from what this meant. Karen's boat patrols weren't just annoying, they were financial suicide, for her and everyone following her lead. Now I had real leverage, but Marlo's advice was golden. Let them keep digging. Sometimes the best legal strategy is watching your opponent make bigger mistakes. So I stayed quiet and kept my cameras rolling. Every boat circle, every megaphone announcement, every time they violated basic boating safety near my dock, my evidence folder was getting fatter than Murphy's pie slices. Karen wasn't done escalating, though. The psychological warfare started the next week with surgical precision. Suddenly, everywhere I went in town, conversations stopped when I walked in. At the hardware store, people whispered behind paint displays. At the gas station, the clerk avoided eye contact like I had something contagious. Karen had been busy painting me as some kind of anti-social threat to their perfect lakefront community. She even set up a petition table outside the grocery store, collecting signatures for enhanced lake safety regulations that obviously targeted me. Her presentation was polished, professional, and completely misleading. Watching her work was like seeing a master manipulator in action. Almost impressive if it wasn't so infuriating. He just does whatever he wants out there, she told potential signers, voice dripping with manufactured concern. No regard for community safety or property values. We need protection from this kind of behavior. But small towns have their own brand of justice. And Karen was about to discover that gossip cuts both ways, especially when you're spreading lies about someone whose family helped build the community. Karen's smear campaign was working better than she probably expected. By Wednesday, I'd gotten 3 dirty looks at the post office and 2 people had actually crossed the street to avoid me. Small-town social warfare at its finest. But Karen made one critical mistake. She got greedy. Thursday morning, I'm enjoying my usual coffee and sunrise routine when a state truck pulls into my driveway. Official government plates, serious-looking guy in a uniform. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with morning lake air as he climbed out. My first thought? Karen had somehow escalated to federal agencies. Mr. Garrison? Officer Martinez, Department of Environmental Protection. We received a complaint about potential environmental damage from unpermitted dock construction. I invited him down to examine my grandfather's 60-year-old wooden dock, the same dock that had weathered decades of storms without losing a single board. Officer Martinez spent 10 minutes checking the structure, taking photos, consulting his tablet. Then he surprised me. Sir, this is actually textbook environmentally conscious construction. Whoever built this understood sustainable lakefront development. He pointed toward the far shore where HOA boats clustered around concrete ramps. Now those structures over there, different story entirely. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? Multiple unpermitted concrete installations built directly into the lake bed. No environmental impact studies, no proper drainage, no fish habitat considerations. He made notes on his clipboard. Plus, there's the matter of outstanding violation fines. That's when I learned something beautiful. The HOA owed $15,000 in unpaid environmental penalties. Violations they'd been ignoring while Karen lectured me about community standards. I remembered my grandfather once explaining why he'd used wood instead of concrete for our dock. Wood breathes with the water, he'd said. Concrete just sits there like a dead thing, killing everything underneath. Turns out environmental science had caught up with his common sense. After Officer Martinez left, I sat on my dock feeling warm afternoon sun on my shoulders and processing the irony. Karen's environmental complaint had boomeranged straight back at her organization's own violations. Time for some strategic construction. I decided to expand my dock, not out of spite, but education. If Karen wanted authority over lake structures, she should understand what properly permitted construction actually looked like. That weekend, I designed a legitimate fishing pier, multiple stations, proper lighting, full environmental compliance. The satisfying scratch of pencil on graph paper as I planned each detail reminded me why I'd loved being an electrician, solving problems with careful planning and honest work. Monday morning brought my construction application to the county. Complete environmental review, structural engineering, everything Karen's concrete ramps had skipped. Sometimes showing someone how things should be done speaks louder than arguments. Karen's response was swift and digital. She launched Lake Serenity Community Safety on Facebook, posting photos that made my property look like an industrial disaster. Creative angles, misleading captions, carefully cropped images. Digital manipulation worthy of a propaganda ministry. This is what happens when community standards don't apply to everyone, read one post showing my toolshed photograph to look like a factory. The comments became an echo chamber of manufactured outrage from people who'd never seen my actual property. Watching grown adults get worked up over lies about my grandfather's fishing dock was like watching people argue about whether the moon was made of cheese. Frustrating and ridiculous in equal measure. But Karen had made another miscalculation. Jim and Patricia Williams lived on the South Shore, outside HOA reach. They'd watched Karen's empire-building attempts with growing disgust, especially after she'd tried claiming authority over their property too. Patricia worked at the county clerk's office. Jim was retired military police with a passion for documentation. They'd been building their own evidence file for months, timestamps, photos, recordings of Karen's more outrageous claims. Turns out I wasn't her only target, just her most visible one. Wednesday evening, Patricia called with explosive information. Wade, you need to see the public records. That HOA is facing bankruptcy. Between environmental fines and unauthorized legal fees Karen approved without board votes, they're drowning financially. Suddenly, Karen's desperate behavior made perfect sense. She wasn't just power-hungry anymore. She was fighting for organizational survival. and desperate people make the biggest mistakes. That evening, something appeared in my mailbox that would change everything. No fancy envelope, no dramatic delivery, just information that had been hiding in plain sight for 60 years. What I found in my mailbox wasn't mysterious at all. Just a manila envelope with a return address I recognized, the law office that had handled my grandfather's estate. Inside was a note from his old lawyer's son, now running the practice. "Wade, we found this in Dad's files while digitizing old records. Thought you might find it interesting given what we've been hearing around town." The document inside made my hands tremble. Original lake development contract, dated 1962, signed by my grandfather and the county. I'd seen parts of it before during estate settlement, but never read the fine print. Never had reason to. Now I had every reason in the world. Section 12, paragraph 3. Developer retains perpetual exclusive rights to Eastern Shore Development Oversight and Consultation Authority for any community organization seeking lake management responsibilities. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. My grandfather hadn't just bought lakefront property. He'd retained legal oversight authority for anyone wanting to manage lake activities. The musty smell of old paper mixed with fresh lake breeze as I sat on my porch processing the implications. Section 15 was even better. Any community organization assuming lake management duties shall compensate the original developer family at fair market rates for consultation and cooperation services, calculated monthly based on scope of management activities undertaken. My coffee went cold as reality hit. The HOA hadn't just been operating without permission for 3 years. They legally owed me money for every single lake management activity they'd performed. It was like discovering your annoying neighbor had been stealing your electricity while complaining about your lawn care. The next morning, I drove straight to Marlo Oakley's office. The familiar smell of fresh legal briefs and industrial-strength coffee filled the waiting room as I clutched my grandfather's contract like a winning lottery ticket. Marlo's reaction was worth the drive. "Holy hell, Wade, this is ironclad." She spread the contract across her mahogany desk, studying each clause with the intensity of a jeweler examining diamonds. "Your grandfather essentially retained developer oversight rights in perpetuity. Every HOA lake activity without your consent is a contract violation." We spent 2 hours calculating what the HOA legally owed me. Lake management consultation, $500 monthly for 3 years. Boat launch usage fees for 24 households, $50 each per month. Environmental oversight for their unpermitted construction, $200 monthly. Total retroactive compensation, $28,800. But the real power wasn't in past fees, it was in future control. You don't just own your shoreline, Wade. You have legal authority over anyone wanting to manage lake activities. They need your permission, and they need to pay fair compensation. Marlo tapped the contract with her pen. In property law, original development contracts create binding obligations that transfer with ownership. They're nearly impossible to overturn. The takeaway was crystal clear. Always research original development contracts before assuming HOA authority extends beyond their actual legal boundaries. I sat back in Marlo's leather chair, watching dust motes dance in afternoon sunlight streaming through her window. 3 months ago, I'd been a retired electrician who just wanted to fish in peace. Now I held legal authority over the very organization that had been harassing me. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. That evening, I drove to my grandfather's grave at Sunset Memorial. The granite headstone felt cool and smooth under my palm as I told him what his foresight had accomplished. He'd protected our family's interests 60 years into the future, probably knowing that someday developers would try to claim authority over what he'd built. "You always were 10 steps ahead, Grandpa," I whispered into the evening air, thick with honeysuckle and approaching rain. "Thanks for looking out for us." But as satisfying as this discovery was, I knew timing would be everything. Reveal too early, and Karen might find legal loopholes. Wait too long, and the financially struggling HOA might declare bankruptcy, making recovery impossible. The perfect opportunity was approaching. Karen had scheduled another emergency community meeting for the following weekend, promoting it on Facebook as a chance to address the ongoing property dispute threatening our community. She planned to present compelling evidence of my anti-community behavior and demand decisive action to protect property values. What Karen didn't know was that I'd be bringing my own evidence, evidence that would transform me from community threat to community authority figure in about 5 minutes. Time to let Karen dig just a little bit deeper before I buried her arguments completely. The next morning, I met Marlo at her office to plan what she called Operation Legal Reality Check. She'd outlined a 3-phase strategy on her whiteboard like we were planning the D-Day invasion of Karen's delusions. Phase 1, formal notice with compensation demand. Phase 2, cease and desist for unauthorized activities. Phase 3, public revelation at her own meeting. The smell of dry erase markers mixed with coffee as we worked through details. Marlo explained something I'd never considered. In contract disputes, you always document violations before demanding payment. It's like taking photos of car damage before calling insurance. Protects you legally and strengthens your negotiating position if things escalate to court. We calculated every penny the HOA owed me. Lake management consultation, $500 monthly for 36 months. Boat launch fees, $50 per household times 24 families times 3 years. Environmental oversight for their unpermitted concrete disasters, $200 monthly. Total legitimate compensation, $28,800. The beauty is, these aren't revenge penalties, Marlo said, organizing our paperwork into military-precise stacks. These are fair market rates for services they've been receiving free, like discovering your neighbor's been using your Wi-Fi for 3 years while complaining about your hedge height. While Marlo drafted legal documents with surgical precision, I started my own quiet campaign. Not Karen's dramatic Facebook theater, but actual conversations with real neighbors who'd been watching this circus unfold from their front row seats. Tuesday evening brought coffee and homemade cookies with Jim and Patricia Williams. Their kitchen smelled like vanilla and common sense as Patricia opened her evidence folder, a thick binder that would make any prosecutor proud. Karen tried claiming authority over our property too, Patricia said, showing me photos of their perfectly normal garden shed. Said it didn't meet community standards, even though we're clearly outside HOA boundaries. Woman actually measured our property line with a tape measure like she was surveying for NASA. Jim's military background showed in his documentation. Timestamps, photographs, detailed notes written in neat block letters. 30 years in MP taught me to keep records, he said. Never know when you'll need evidence, and Karen's been testing boundaries all around this lake. Turns out 3 other families had similar grandfather clauses buried in their original deeds. Karen's HOA had been operating on pure assumption for years, never bothering to research the actual legal framework they claimed to enforce. It was like watching someone direct traffic without checking if they actually worked for the city. Wednesday brought my ace ally, marina owner Frank Rodriguez. His dock office overlooked the entire lake, and he'd watched Karen's empire-building attempts with professional amusement mixed with growing irritation. She's been telling my customers they need HOA approval to use my boat ramp, Frank said, laughing while showing me his permits folder. Problem is, my marina predates her HOA by 15 years. I've got environmental clearances they only dream about. Frank's records revealed something delicious. The HOA owed him over $3,000 in unpaid usage fees. Karen had been authorizing members to use his private facilities while refusing to pay established rates, apparently believing that HOA membership granted universal lake access. I've been patient because I like keeping peace, Frank said, straightening his already organized files. But if you're taking legal action, count me in. Time these folks learned how property rights actually work in the real world. Meanwhile, I continued building my dock extension. Each morning, the rhythmic hammering echoed across still water like a woodpecker with a law degree. The sound seemed to say, "This is how you do things legally." The visual contrast was perfect. Me working on properly permitted construction while their concrete ramps violated multiple environmental regulations. Sometimes the best arguments don't need words. They just need obvious examples of right versus wrong. Thursday evening, Marlo called with our legal arsenal complete. 20 pages of documentation that transforms your grandfather's simple contract into comprehensive property rights assertion. Professional, reasonable, and designed to show we're enforcing legitimate obligations, not seeking petty revenge. The timing was surgical. We'll serve papers right before the community meeting. Gives Karen just enough time to panic and make mistakes, but not enough to organize coherent resistance or find legal loopholes. Friday night, I sat on my completed dock, watching sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and orange. The new planks felt solid under my bare feet, worn smooth by decades of honest work, and professional fishing stations would accommodate multiple neighbors comfortably. This wasn't about beating Karen anymore. It was about establishing clear boundaries, fair compensation, and mutual respect. The dock would symbolize cooperation, once legal obligations were properly met and acknowledged. Tomorrow's meeting would determine whether Karen wanted to work within legal reality or keep fighting the constitution of lake property rights that my grandfather had helped write 60 years ago. Either way, I was ready. And honestly, after months of dealing with her manufactured nonsense, I was actually looking forward to watching Karen's face when she realized she'd been playing checkers while I'd been reading the actual rulebook. Saturday morning arrived with Karen's most desperate move yet. I'm out on my new dock at dawn, testing the fishing stations and breathing in that crisp lake air mixed with pine needles when power tools start screaming across the water. Karen and 3 HOA board members are creating construction chaos at the water's edge. Yellow caution tape, orange safety cones, equipment that could build an airport. From my security cameras, it looked like major unauthorized work. My phone rang within the hour. "Mr. Garrison, this is Inspector Williams from County Building. We've received reports of unpermitted construction on your property. I need to verify compliance immediately." I almost choked on my coffee. "Inspector Williams, I have all my permits right here. Filed everything properly months ago. Want me to email copies?" Well, that's unusual. The complaint mentioned unauthorized dock expansion without environmental clearance. 20 minutes later, Inspector Williams stood on my perfectly legal dock, reviewing my paperwork while shaking his head like he was watching someone argue with gravity. "Mr. Garrison, your permits are textbook perfect." He gestured toward Karen's construction theater across the lake. "Now that over there, that's a different story. No permits filed for whatever they're attempting." While the inspector shut down Karen's unauthorized project, I realized her strategy. Create fake emergency construction, then claim I was the illegal operator. It was like trying to frame someone for speeding by breaking the speed limit yourself, but Karen's desperation was just warming up. Tuesday brought a knock from someone in an expensive suit who looked miserable. Nervous smile, briefcase that cost more than my truck, and the demeanor of a man who hadn't been told the whole truth. "Mr. Garrison, Attorney Mitchell Stevens, representing Lake Serenity HOA. My clients want to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement regarding your recent concerns." Karen had hired legal muscle. With what money, considering their financial troubles, I had no idea. But apparently, intimidation through expensive lawyers was her next play. "Ms. Kellerman authorized me to offer $2,000 to relocate your dock to a less prominent position. This would restore community harmony and protect property values." I pulled out my phone and hit record, something I'd learned was perfectly legal in our state as long as one party consents. Always document when lawyers make offers, because memories get fuzzy but recordings don't lie. "Mr. Stevens, I appreciate the offer, but my dock stays where my grandfather built it 60 years ago. Tell your clients to research original lake development contracts before making more offers. Might save everyone some embarrassment." The lawyer left looking like someone had handed him a map to Atlantis. Smart attorneys ask the right questions before making offers. Desperate clients don't always provide honest answers. Wednesday brought Karen's most creative harassment yet. She organized daily wellness patrols, 5 boats playing different music at maximum volume, circling my shoreline every morning from 7 to 9. Classical, country, rap, death metal. The acoustic nightmare sounded like someone had put a radio inside a blender and hit puree. The cacophony bouncing off the water made my peaceful fishing mornings feel like a carnival from hell. But noise pollution works both ways. I retrieved my grandfather's old air horn, Coast Guard approved emergency signal, loud enough to register on seismic equipment. Every time Karen's floating jukebox violated my 100-foot no-wake zone, they got a friendly safety blast. Amazing how quickly wellness patrols lose enthusiasm when someone returns their energy with compound interest. Thursday evening, Frank called with disturbing intelligence. "Wade, Karen's spreading dangerous lies at the marina. Claims you threatened violence and she fears for her safety." This was escalation to seriously dangerous territory. False threat accusations could involve police, create legal problems, damage reputations permanently. Karen was playing with dynamite now. "She's also telling people you plan to charge lake admission and commercialize everything," Frank continued, building quite the scary narrative about your intentions. Karen was constructing a two-pronged attack. Paint me as both physical threat and economic enemy. Classic manipulation, make people afraid, then position yourself as their protector. But she'd made one critical error. In desperation to destroy my credibility, she was creating more harassment evidence while proving she understood nothing about the legal situation she'd stumbled into. By Friday, the rumors had spread throughout town like spilled paint. At the hardware store, conversations stopped when I walked in. At the gas station, people avoided eye contact. Karen's character assassination was working, turning neighbors who'd known my family for decades into suspicious strangers. The irony was thick enough to cut with a fishing knife. Karen was destroying community harmony while claiming to protect it, creating the exact problems she accused me of causing. But every lie she told, every false claim she made, every harassment tactic she employed was being documented by multiple sources. My cameras, Frank's records, Jim and Patricia's notes, even social media posts she thought were helping her case. Karen was building the evidence file for her own downfall, one desperate move at a time. Saturday's meeting was going to be very educational. The week leading up to Karen's community meeting turned into psychological warfare on steroids. She wasn't just spreading rumors anymore. She was conducting a full-scale media campaign designed to destroy my reputation before Saturday's showdown. Monday morning, I opened the local newspaper to find a half-page article titled, "Lake Community Faces Property Dispute." The reporter had clearly gotten most of their information from Karen, painting me as some kind of antisocial hermit threatening peaceful lakefront living. One longtime resident has been expanding dock structures without community consultation, the article read. Neighbors expressed concern about potential commercialization and environmental impact on this pristine family lake. The photo they used showed my dock from the worst possible angle, making my grandfather's humble fishing pier look like some kind of industrial installation. Meanwhile, Karen's quotes painted her as a concerned community leader just trying to protect everyone's investment. I called the reporter immediately. "This is Wade Garrison. I'd like to provide some context for your lake story." The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Oakley, sounded surprised to hear from me. "Mr. Garrison, I did try to reach you for comment, but no one answered your phone. I never received any calls, but I'd be happy to share documentation of property rights, environmental permits, and the harassment campaign your article doesn't mention." Within 2 hours, Jessica was sitting on my dock with a digital recorder, photographing my permits and reviewing my grandfather's original development contract. The smell of fresh newsprint from her notebook mixed with lake breeze as she took detailed notes. "Mr. Garrison, this completely changes the story. Why didn't the HOA mention your family's original development rights?" "You'd have to ask them, but I suspect they never researched the legal foundation before assuming authority." Tuesday's follow-up article presented a much different narrative. "Lake property rights traced to original 1962 development contract," read the new headline. Jessica had done her homework, interviewing county officials and reviewing public records, but Karen's response was swift and vicious. She organized what she called a community safety forum at the fire station, complete with printed flyers about protecting our lake from commercial exploitation. I didn't attend, but Jim Williams did. He called afterward with a full report that made my blood boil. "Wade, that woman stood up there and basically accused you of being a dangerous threat to community safety, said you've been making threatening gestures and that families are afraid to let their children near the water." The lies were getting more elaborate and more dangerous. Karen was systematically poisoning community sentiment while positioning Saturday's meeting as some kind of intervention to protect innocent families from my imaginary threats. Wednesday brought Karen's most calculated move yet. She contacted my insurance company claiming my dock expansion created liability risks for neighboring properties. Apparently, she'd researched enough to know that insurance investigations could create serious financial problems. The insurance adjuster, a pleasant woman named Maria Santos, arrived Thursday morning to inspect my property. The sound of her heels clicking on my dock planks echoed across the water as she examined every joint and support beam. "Mr. Garrison, I have to say, this is some of the finest dock construction I've seen. Your permits are in perfect order, and the environmental compliance is exemplary." She photographed the structure from multiple angles. Whoever filed the complaint clearly doesn't understand maritime construction standards. Maria's report would actually strengthen my position, but Karen's strategy was becoming clear. She was trying to create so many bureaucratic problems that I'd eventually surrender just to make the harassment stop. Thursday evening brought the most disturbing development yet. Patricia Williams called with urgent information from her county clerk connections. Wade, Karen's been researching your personal finances through public records, property taxes, business licenses, anything she can access legally. She's building some kind of comprehensive file on you. This was stalking behavior disguised as community research. Karen was crossing lines that transformed neighborhood disputes into personal harassment campaigns. The fact that she was using public records made it legal, but no less invasive or threatening. Friday morning, I discovered Karen had created a second Facebook group called Lake Serenity Truth Forum. This one was private, invitation only, and dedicated entirely to sharing evidence of my anti-community behavior. Screenshots from Jim's military contacts showed posts featuring photos of my property taken with telephoto lenses, detailed analyses of my daily routines, and speculation about my real motives for dock expansion. It was like reading a conspiracy theory forum dedicated to my fishing habits. The group had 43 members, including several local business owners and 3 city council members. Karen had been more effective at community organizing than I'd realized, but she'd also created a digital paper trail of harassment that would be invaluable evidence if the situation required legal intervention. Every screenshot, every post, every member list was being documented by allies who understood the importance of evidence. Saturday morning was going to be interesting. Karen had successfully painted me as a community threat, but she'd also given me everything I needed to prove her harassment campaign violated both legal and ethical boundaries. Time to see which narrative would survive contact with actual facts. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes you grateful to be alive. I pulled into the community center parking lot at exactly 7 o'clock, carrying a leather briefcase that contained enough legal documentation to change everything. The place was packed. 50-plus people filled every folding chair, with more standing along the walls. I recognized faces from around town, some friendly, some neutral, some openly hostile thanks to Karen's week-long propaganda campaign. Karen had set up a presentation area complete with a projector, easel, and what looked like a courtroom's worth of evidence boards. She wore her best business suit and carried herself like a prosecutor about to deliver a closing argument that would send someone to prison. The smell of burnt coffee and nervous energy filled the room as people whispered and pointed in my direction. I found a seat in the back, nodding politely to neighbors who bothered making eye contact. "Good evening, everyone," Karen began, her voice carrying that perfect blend of authority and concern she'd perfected. "Thank you for attending this emergency meeting about the property situation threatening our community." She clicked to her first slide, a photo of my dock taken from an angle that made it look massive and industrial. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. For months, one individual has been expanding structures, ignoring community standards, and creating potential liability for all of us. Karen's voice rose with practiced indignation. "Tonight, we need to decide how to protect our families and property values." She spent 15 minutes building her case. Photos, complaints, manufactured evidence of my anti-community behavior. The presentation was polished, professional, and completely misleading. Watching her work was like seeing a master manipulator at peak performance. "This individual refuses to cooperate with reasonable requests," Karen continued, gesturing dramatically toward my section. "He's threatened board members, violated environmental standards, and shows complete disregard for community harmony." The crowd was eating it up. Heads nodding, angry whispers, concerned glances in my direction. Karen had successfully painted me as the villain in her carefully crafted drama. "We need immediate action to protect ourselves from this escalating situation," she concluded. "I'm recommending we petition the county for emergency intervention and consider legal action to force compliance with community standards." Applause erupted from about half the room. Karen smiled triumphantly, clearly believing she'd won decisively. That's when I stood up. "Excuse me, Karen, mind if I respond to some of those allegations?" The room went dead silent. Karen's confident smile flickered like a candle in wind. "Of course, Wade, though I think the evidence speaks for itself." I walked to the front, opened my briefcase, and pulled out the document that would change everything. The original 1962 lake development contract, highlighted and tabbed for easy reference. Folks, before we talk about community standards and legal action, maybe we should discuss actual legal authority. I held up the contract. This is the original lake development agreement signed by my grandfather and the county 60 years ago. I read Section 12, Paragraph 3 slowly and clearly. Developer retains perpetual exclusive rights to Eastern Shore Development Oversight and Consultation Authority for any community organization seeking lake management responsibilities. The room's energy shifted like air pressure before a thunderstorm, people leaning forward, confused murmurs, Karen's face going pale. What this means, I continued, is that any organization wanting to manage lake activities needs my family's permission and compensation. Permission that was never requested, compensation that's never been paid. I pulled out Marlowe's calculations. According to fair market rates, the HOA owes my family $28,800 in retroactive consultation fees for 3 years of unauthorized lake management. Karen tried to interrupt. That's ridiculous. That contract can't possibly... It's been verified by maritime lawyers and county officials, I said calmly. But here's the interesting part. I'm not interested in bankrupting anyone or destroying the community. I looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. I'm proposing a simple solution. The HOA pays a reduced settlement fee, gains formal access rights under fair usage agreements, and we all work together on legitimate community improvements. A man in the front row raised his hand. What about all these allegations of threats and anti-community behavior? I pulled out my phone, connected it to Karen's projector, and started playing security footage. This is every interaction I've had with HOA board members. You can judge for yourselves who's been threatening whom. The videos showed Karen trespassing on my property, her boat patrols harassing my fishing, board members measuring my shoreline without permission. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Karen's carefully constructed narrative crumbled in real time. People started looking at her with suspicion instead of sympathy. The truth is, I said, I never wanted conflict. I just wanted to fish in peace on my family's lake. But since Karen insists on managing lake activities, she needs to honor the legal obligations that come with that authority. Karen stood up, her voice shaking with rage. This is extortion. You're trying to destroy our community harmony. No, Karen. I'm trying to restore it, based on honest communication, legal compliance, and mutual respect. The applause that followed was different from Karen's earlier reception. This was genuine, relieved, and unanimous. The immediate aftermath of that meeting was like watching a dam burst in slow motion. Karen stormed out before anyone could ask follow-up questions, leaving her presentation materials behind like evidence at a crime scene. Within the hour, the local reporter Jessica Oakley had the full story. Her Sunday article ran with the headline, "Lake Property Rights Settled. Original Developer Contract Resolves Community Dispute." The piece included photos of my grandfather's 1962 contract and interviews with county officials confirming its validity. Monday morning brought a phone call from the new HOA board president, elected hastily after Karen's resignation. Patricia Morrison, a retired teacher with actual common sense, wanted to discuss reasonable settlement terms. Wade, we had no idea about your grandfather's contract or Karen's methods. The board voted unanimously to accept your proposed agreement and apologize for the harassment you've endured. We met Wednesday at Marlowe's office to finalize everything. The HOA agreed to pay $15,000 in settlement fees, half the original amount I could have demanded. In exchange, they gained formal lake access rights under a fair usage agreement that protected everyone's interests. More importantly, they established new bylaws requiring legal review before any property disputes and mandatory disclosure of existing contracts or easements. The community had learned an expensive lesson about research before action. The money itself wasn't the victory, though. It was what I decided to do with it that felt right. 2 weeks later, I announced the creation of the Lake Serenity Conservation Fund. The entire settlement would fund environmental improvements, community projects, and something my grandfather would have loved: an annual scholarship for local students studying environmental science or sustainable development. The first project was upgrading the lake's fish habitat with professionally designed spawning beds and native plant restoration. Ironically, the HOA's unpermitted concrete boat ramps were replaced with environmentally friendly alternatives that actually improved water quality. By November, my dock had become an unofficial community gathering spot. Kids learned fishing basics during weekend clinics, seniors enjoyed peaceful morning coffee sessions, and families used the multiple fishing stations for weekend outings. The usage fees from HOA members covered maintenance costs while funding additional improvements. Frank Rodriguez expanded his marina services, working with the new HOA leadership to create proper boat launch facilities that met all environmental standards. The cooperative atmosphere attracted more families to the lake, actually increasing property values despite Karen's dire predictions. Jim and Patricia Williams organized the first annual Lake Serenity Community Festival, featuring local food vendors, live music, and educational booths about lake conservation. The event raised additional funds for environmental projects while bringing neighbors together around shared values rather than manufactured conflicts. The transformation was remarkable. What had started as petty harassment between neighbors evolved into a model of community cooperation and environmental stewardship. As for Karen Kellerman, she moved away from the lake within 6 months. Word around town was that her real estate license faced review due to ethical violations related to her property dispute tactics. She'd learned the hard way that manipulation and intimidation eventually backfire when confronted with documentation and legal facts. I often think about that lesson while sitting on my dock during peaceful sunrise fishing sessions. The smell of coffee mixing with pine-scented lake air reminds me why my grandfather chose this spot. He understood that true community comes from respecting boundaries, honoring agreements, and working together instead of trying to control others. The dock extension serves daily as a symbol of what's possible when people choose cooperation over conflict. Multiple fishing stations accommodate visitors, while solar-powered lights make evening fishing safe and enjoyable. The structure demonstrates that individual property rights and community benefits aren't mutually exclusive. They strengthen each other when approached with honesty and good faith. Marlo Oakley still handles legal matters for several lake property owners, helping them understand their rights while avoiding conflicts. She's become something of a local expert on historic property contracts and their modern applications. The Lake Serenity story spread beyond our community, attracting attention from property rights advocates and HOA reform groups. We've had visitors from other states wanting to understand how legal research and patient documentation can resolve disputes that seemed impossible to settle. Looking back, I'm grateful for Karen's harassment campaign. Without her overreach, I never would have discovered my grandfather's foresight or understood the legal protections he'd built into our property rights. Her attempts to steal authority over what wasn't hers ultimately strengthened community bonds and established frameworks for future cooperation. Every morning as I watch the sun rise over water my family has protected for 60 years, I remember that the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something better than what existed before. So here's my message to anyone dealing with HOA nightmares or property disputes. Document everything, research your rights, find good legal help, and remember that patience plus preparation usually defeats manipulation plus intimidation. And hey, if you've got your own HOA horror story, drop it in the comments. You never know who might learn something that helps them stand up for their rights. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about turning conflict into community benefit, because sometimes the best victories are the ones that make everyone's lives better in the end.
Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.